Hi, and welcome to Ant's Old Cricket Shorts. And a special welcome to those of you coming from the White Line Wireless podcast to get the second part. Please take the time to look through my other videos. There's a few dozen short cricket stories on my channel. Today we're continuing the saga of South Africa choking in World Cups. In part 1 we looked at the 90s. Now it's time to look at the new millennium. For most of the first decade of this century, Australia and South Africa owned the number 1 and 2 positions on the ICC ODI rankings. Between January 96 and August 2012, the Proteas were the only team that could knock Australia out of number 1. In 2003, it was time for the World Cup to visit Africa, with Zimbabwe and Kenya joining South Africa in hosting games. African neighbour Namibia were also there, having qualified through the ICC trophy. For Namibia, just being at the World Cup was a victory, so even though they lost all 6 of their games, and spoiler alert here, they still didn't have the worst World Cup of the African teams. Zimbabwe once again made the Super Sixes, but no further. The real surprise of the tournament, however, was the Kenyans, who progressed on to the knockout stage only to be beaten by India for the place to play Australia in the final. But this is about the South Africans. Their first World Cup on home soil, the perfect place to atone for 3 previous World Cup chokes. A narrow loss to the West Indies was a poor way to start, but things got back on track with a 10-wicket thrashing of Kenya in Game 2. In the third game, the South Africans came up against New Zealand. Herschel Gibbs smashed 143 to lead the Proteas to a strong 309 in the first innings. Then up stood Stephen Fleming, taking 43 balls to rack up his first 35 runs, before the game was interrupted due to a power failure. Fleming then took 4 consecutive boundaries off Jack Callis's first over to bring up his better-than-a-runner ball 50. Shortly later, Mark Boucher, behind the stumps, dropped a regulation catch with Fleming on 53. In the 30th over, the rains came with New Zealand 1 for 182. When play resumed, the game had been brought down to 39 overs, the Kiwis needing 44 off 51 balls. They would only need 38. The mathematics of a rain delay were again cruel to South Africa in a World Cup. But then after walkovers against Bangladesh and Canada, South Africa were next matched against Sri Lanka in a must-win game for both teams. Sri Lanka set a gettable target of 268. Herschel Gibbs led the chase with his 73, but it would be Klusener and Boucher at the crease in at the start of the 45th over, needing 53 from 36. The rain began to fall, and all the players sensed that this game would be ending at the end of the over. 14 needed from 6. Muralidharan to Boucher, 1 run, 13 from 5. Muralidharan to Klusener, no run, 13 from 4. Muralidharan to Klusener, no run, 13 from 3. The game looked gone. Muralidharan to Klusener, wide, 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 wide. All of a sudden, 8 from 3 are needed. Muralidharan to Klusener, 1 run, 7 from 2. Muralidharan to Boucher, 6. 1 run needed off the final ball. Boucher reached into his pocket and brought out his note with the target on it. 229, the exact score South Africa had, and the score they had to beat to get through to the Super Sixes stage of the tournament. Boucher, thinking the job done, tips the ball to mid-wicket and leaves the ground to face the harsh reality of cricket maths and the South African crowd. Now on to 2007, and the World Cup heads to the West Indies. South Africa are the number 1 ODI team in the world and were coming off series wins against India and Pakistan. For logistical reasons, group seedings were based on expected crowds rather than rankings, meaning the 2 best teams in the world, South Africa and Australia, were seeded together in Group A. All that would be needed to advance to the next round was to keep Scotland and the Netherlands at bay. The South Africa-Australia match was the closest in the group, but even then the Aussies took the game by 83 runs. In the Super 8s round, the Proteas beat England, the West Indies, Ireland and Sri Lanka. But their loss against Australia carried over from the group stage, and then combined with losses against New Zealand and Bangladesh, who had already been responsible for India's early exit, meant the South Africans would once again come up against Australia in the knockout round. In that game, the South African batting attack left their brains at home and fell apart against the ruthless attack of Glenn McGrath and Sean Tate, who took 7 wickets between them. In 2011, it was a return to Asia. Pakistan, Sri Lanka and India again sharing hosting duties. although all of the Pakistan games were moved to Bangladesh due to ongoing security concerns. South Africa came into the tournament ranked third in the world, a point behind India and a point ahead of Sri Lanka, but all three were a long way distant from number one Australia. A close 6-run loss to England was South Africa's only stumble on the way to winning Group B, setting up a quarter-final match against New Zealand. New Zealand batted first and set a meagre total of 221. Jesse Ryder's 83, the only light in an innings that featured 7 South Africans having a bowl. Callis and de Villiers were cruising at 2 for 108 at the start of the 24th over. Callis, searching for the boundary, only found the hands of Jacob Oram, who took a beautiful catch to send the South African walking. A few overs later, Duminy would join him, bowled by McCallum. And then 2 balls later, AB was run out off a beautiful piece of fielding from Martin Guptill. The rot was on. Only Faf du Plessis would offer any resistance as the South Africans choked around him to be all out for just 172. 2015, Australia and New Zealand. The joint hosts were strongly fancied, but third-ranked South Africa were confident they could do it. This time. South Africa were beaten by group winners India, and again came off second best in a Duckworth-Lewis decision in the match against Pakistan. But they still went through the knockout stage in second place. An easy win against Sri Lanka set up the semi-final against New Zealand. This time, finally, a South African would get to play in the World Cup final. Duckworth-Lewis. How those words must be hated in South Africa. South Africa's 281 for 5 in 43 rain-shortened overs should have been enough. With 31 balls to go, the Kiwis needed 46. With 17, it was 29. With 7, it was 13. Johannesburg-born Kiwi Grant Elliott skied a Morkel delivery to the outfield. Duminy and Bahadian, both chasing and not calling, then collided instead of catching. 12 needed off the last over. The ball is given to Dale Steyn. Vettori sneaks a bye, bringing Elliott on strike. He drives the single, and Steyn is limping. Vettori squeezes Steyn's Yorker to the boundary and then sneaks a bye off the next ball. 5 runs needed, 2 balls to go. South African facing South African. Steyn charges in and delivers a ball at length. Elliott goes deep into his crease and losts over wide long on, taking the 6 runs needed to finally get a South African to the World Cup final, leaving 11 of his former countrymen bereft in defeat once more. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to check in next week for another episode. And keep an eye on the White Line Wireless podcast for our next episode, due out sometime before the 3rd test. Please like this if you liked it, and tweet me on @AdCondon if you have a story you'd like me to look into. I'll see you next week.